understand what is IFAD, what does the policy say.
Nosotros siempre hablamos de la necesidad de institucionalizar la participación de los pueblos indígenas.
Porque probablemente la mejor inversión que podamos hacer en el mundo rural en América Latina sea justamente invertir en los activos culturales de pueblos indígenas y de pueblos afros.
We think that it is high time that we define the way we engage with IFAD by having
Well, IFAD's mission is about agricultural rural development and specifically rural poverty reduction. Now, indigenous people are disproportionately represented amongst the poorer sectors of the poorer countries. So, since our focus is on the poorer sectors, indigenous people are in the center frame in a large number of countries.
I am delighted to welcome you to IFAD's workshop on establishing an Indigenous Peoples Forum. Many of you have traveled great distances to be here with us today, and we are privileged and happy to have you join us.
Este foro va a permitir institucionalizar un espacio para discutir de grandes políticas, de grandes lineamientos y también como para monitorear un poco las actividades del FIDA. A mí me interesa más la parte operacional, es decir, las cosas concretas que de ahí van a salir y en particular si es que podemos, por un lado, aumentar la eficiencia de lo que estamos haciendo en nuestras operaciones con pueblos afros e indígenas.
This preparatory meeting is to set up a process. There's an analog actually that we set up a similar thing with farmers' organizations, since the principal target of IFAD is smallholder farmers, which represent about 500 million farms on the planet. And we set up this process to improve our dialogue with the policies that concern indigenous people and how better to mesh that with our principal mission on rural poverty reduction.
The difference now, what has been the level of impact of IFAD projects prior to the policy of engagement? Yeah, so that's already the impact baseline.
The establishment of a forum of indigenous peoples at IFAD is, I think, a step in the right direction, you know, because then it provides a space, at least for an interaction, a better interaction of indigenous peoples and IFAD.
El hecho de que IFAD haya convocado a este taller para conformar el Foro Indígena lo consideramos como un paso importante, puesto que sienta las bases para la implementación de su política de actuación en relación con los pueblos indígenas.
We need to understand what is IFAD, what does the policy says in relation to indigenous peoples, okay? IFAD need also to learn about indigenous peoples. Indigenous people is not about rural poverty, basically. You know, a lot of the United Nations agencies, they keep talking about rural communities, rural poverty. You know, they need also to get to understand what we mean by indigenous peoples. What are the characteristics? What is the nature of indigenous peoples? Where are they? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? What are their hopes?
Es un gran reto estar acá, ¿no? Y es una gran oportunidad poder transmitir el pensamiento de toda una cuenca amazónica. Al estar acá, creemos que es una oportunidad para poder, primero, aprender, escuchar de todos los hermanos de las regiones para tomar una propia decisión que valide y consolide el pensamiento de los pueblos amazónicos.
We like to think of ourselves as helping people to help themselves. We're not World Food Program, we're not a charity. We don't believe in charity, to tell you the truth. We believe in helping people to help themselves. And this is why we have such a nice alliance with you, because our sense is that this is the kind of support Indigenous peoples' organizations want. They want to help themselves. One of the conclusions that we want to obtain from you in these 2 days is how can we do better? What can IFAD do better to support Indigenous peoples' organizations and Indigenous people?
Hay líderes que están en la actividad agrícola, pero no saben nada de esto, ¿no? Y la función nuestra que estamos acá es compartir esta información y ellos van tomando conciencia y tomarán decisiones de cómo participar también.
Sometimes the work of IFAD is not very clear. Many of us do not know what IFAD is really doing, so this would be one way of actually learning more of what IFAD does, but also learning how this process is going to go. This is in a way quite timely because you have, this is 2011, you have IFAD starting off this process, and from what we have been given to understand, the forum should be established by 2013 when it will have its first meeting. So between now and 2013, this meeting is to bring together Indigenous peoples, different actors, different interest groups, to see how they can come forward with a roadmap that is going to provide guidance on how from, let's say, next Monday to 2013.
We think that it is high time that we define the way we engage with IFAD by having a forum that is driven and inclusive of Indigenous people's representatives, and so that we can be able to define our destiny in collaboration with the IFAD staff.
Nos está ofreciendo IFAD la oportunidad a través de este foro de incidir en sus órganos de gobierno. Nos está ofreciendo la oportunidad de articularnos como pueblos indígenas en esta instancia porque estamos participando indígenas de los distintos continentes. Yo lo veo como una oportunidad que debemos de aprovechar, que se diferencia definitivamente de los otros espacios y los otros mecanismos porque tiene que ver con implementación en el terreno de proyectos y programas que tienen que ver con la reducción de la pobreza.
Of course, the challenge is how to make this work. You know, it's Indigenous peoples are not always included, you know, in many of the development processes within the country. So IFAD should play a very big role in bringing on board Indigenous peoples as part of the decision-making processes when it concerns the development projects or programs that are implemented in their communities.
IFAD through the years has come to recognize the distinctiveness of Indigenous peoples and has come to understand that this distinctiveness is the real asset and is the economic potential to build development upon. We need to make an extra effort to the effort we've done so far at IFAD to ensure that we know better the people and the peoples we work with at country level. So, and we need to know their history, we need to know their aspirations, and we need to know what development means for Indigenous peoples, what poverty means with Indigenous peoples.
En el tiempo que probablemente la mejor inversión que podamos hacer en el mundo rural en América Latina sea justamente invertir en los activos culturales de pueblos indígenas y de pueblos afros. ¿Por qué? Porque estos pueblos tienen respuestas a una serie de preguntas que son sumamente actuales y por lo tanto el reto del futuro no es tanto ver cómo apoyamos la pequeña agricultura o la pequeña ganadería o pequeñas actividades, sino cómo valorizamos los territorios, cómo valorizamos los recursos naturales, cómo contribuimos al cambio climático, cómo generamos nuevos tipos de emprendimientos. Si empezamos preocupándonos por los cultivos de los indígenas y de los afros, hoy en día nos preocupamos muchísimo más por sus saberes y por sus capacidades de contribuir al resto de la sociedad.
Porque no queremos solo reducir nuestra pobreza, sino, y sobre todo, queremos recuperar nuestra riqueza. Es decir, nuestros modos de vida, nuestros territorios, nuestros sistemas de producción y alimentación, nuestra lengua, nuestra historia, nuestra cultura. Y eso es lo que es para nosotros desarrollo con cultura e identidad.
In certain aspects where it was also clearly identified in the lessons learned is the issue of cultural sensitivity, that some projects are not sensitive enough to factor in cultural aspects in terms of, say, the value of resources, that it's more accounted for in terms of its monetary or material value more than the cultural value of these resources from the perspective of indigenous peoples. So I think there are still a lot of lessons to be drawn, and it needs further studies and that should involve the participation of indigenous peoples so that our perspectives and our visions are accounted for in this kind of studies.
You have indigenous knowledge systems, which are different. In fact, in your introductions, the diversity of the places from which you come suggest huge diversity in the situations in which you exist. There is no one size fits all. The Congo Basin is very, very different than the Orinoco River, Venezuela, and the Amazon. What's important, therefore, is your knowledge systems, to respect those knowledge systems and mobilize the knowledge that has been developed after many years of living in these places.
The basic perspectives, views, visions of development have to be understood. Otherwise, then, even with a policy as progressive as IFAD's, when you operationalize it, when you implement it, a lot of it might get lost in the process.
IFAD has a very distinct mandate, which is to promote rural development and poverty reduction. No? So the forum should really be focusing on that mandate. But the way that the forum will do that is to really promote a very vibrant dialogue between indigenous peoples on what is development. You know, how do indigenous peoples look at development, and how does this match the way IFAD is pursuing its own mandate? You know, and I think that's what the forum is all about. This is a body, this is a space where indigenous peoples and IFAD will come together, engage in a dialogue.
Is that we also have to establish the process towards establishing such a forum and have concrete activities so that we can already start learning from each other, IFAD and indigenous peoples, on how it can function effectively. Because, as I mentioned, sometimes on paper it's nice, but in practice you don't see the actual influence.
You know, the challenge, both at the country level and at the global level, is not lack of policy, it's the implementation of policy.
This is one of the very reasons for which we are establishing this forum, precisely because it is a way to have a feedback both at country level and at institutional level here in our headquarters, associated with our governing council meeting, to have a feedback of, do we walk our talk? Are we actually implementing what we have chosen and approved as the guidance on how we want to work? And the forum is very important to do that. There are other ways of doing this, independent evaluation and assessments of our project on the ground. But what is interesting with the forum is that the representative of the very people for which this policy has been designed and approved are here to tell us and to tell our member countries the status of this gap. Is the gap going down? Are we walking our talks or not?
IFAD is coming up to the expectations of indigenous peoples with regards to implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which require UN agencies and programs to involve indigenous peoples meaningfully in the various developments. So to my people, I think I will tell them that this is a good initiative from IFAD, which has the potential to really work and define relationship. And I think it is something also worth copying by different other UN agencies and programs, because they do it in the spirit of implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
Respecting our rights, especially to our right to self-determination, our right over our land, territories, and resources, and our right to define how we want to develop. So along that line, IFAD should just be playing a role in supporting this framework, so that it's clear from the outset that they are simply facilitating how they can help our development the way we want it to be.
I am very optimistic. I'm in fact hoping that this process will be good, that it will be something that we can share and use with the other agencies. There are a lot of UN agencies that some of them have Indigenous peoples policy, but IFAD is the first one, from what I know, that is establishing a specific platform for Indigenous peoples that is going to be a direct interface with the highest level of decision making, policy making that is in the agency.
Well, it's still being discussed now, but I think this process that we're doing today is the first part where we are trying to design, how this forum is going to be, what are its mandates, what are its objectives, who will participate, how will it be governed, all of these things. And then also to define how do we move from here to the existence of the forum. And I think it's not going to be difficult, because indigenous peoples have been involved in creating these kinds of spaces anyway. We established the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, which is also involving governments and the UN. So I think the experiences that we have in the past will inform how we will shape this body that is being deliberated on today.
There is a forum that is just for talking, but we don't see the results in the actual policies and projects, then it will not be successful. But if we see that the participation indeed leads to changes in policies and procedures, then we can say, yes, it has been successful.
I see both opportunities for indigenous peoples and possibilities for IFAD at the same time.
Now we will have defined how we operate, because we have an inclusive body. So to me, 2013 is a meeting of partners who define their destiny together.
Of course I'm optimist. We've done a lot of thinking on this. Of course, one has to temper one's optimism with one's ability to negotiate and persuade those that are less interested.
I'm very optimistic. We fought very hard for this. This is not something that just came out of IFAD. It's something that we as indigenous peoples have worked for many years, and it's now coming into fruition. So we should use this opportunity to really shape it in the way we like it to be.
Me parece que es una oportunidad porque ayuda a reducir esa enorme brecha entre los reconocimientos de los derechos y su implementación.
We have a forum. We started without one, and now we have one.